There is one question in the Idaho 4 case that people are almost not allowed to ask anymore. Every time a true crime creator brings up the surviving roommates, the delay in calling 911, the reported texts, or what they heard and saw that night, the response is almost immediate. Stop victim blaming. Stop victim shaming. Leave the surviving roommates alone. But when did asking about central witnesses in a murder timeline become the same thing as blaming them? Hi, my name is Stina, and welcome. Whether you're new here or you've been following my work for a while, I come from a communication background. So on this channel, I look at true crime through the lens of patterns, public messaging, narrative shifts, and the questions that sometimes get pushed out of the conversation before they're fully examined. And with the Idaho 4 case, I think we've reached one of those places. This is also why I was so excited when I heard about the upcoming book, Broken Plea. It is released in 2 days, and honestly, I felt relieved when I heard it was coming out, because I'm hoping the author addresses some of the questions that have been sitting in the background of this case for a long, long time. Not every Idaho 4 video I make will be structured this way. Some will be more focused on the evidence, the timeline, the plea, the book itself, and whatever Broken Plea brings forward. But this first video felt important because before the book comes out, I want to talk about the question underneath a lot of the roommates' discussion. When did questioning the surviving roommates become labeled as victim blaming? Several big true crime channels have already interviewed the author in the lead up to the release. I've intentionally chosen not to watch those interviews yet. Not because I'm not interested. I am absolutely interested and excited about this book. But because I don't want someone else's framing to shape my opinion before I read the book myself. So my plan is to read it chapter by chapter, react to it with you, and talk through what stands out as we go. And I think that framing deserves its own analysis before the book comes out. So before I go further, I want to be very clear. I am not accusing the surviving roommates of being involved. I am not saying they caused what happened. And I am not here to dehumanize 2 young women who survived something unimaginable, especially when trauma responses do not always make sense from the outside. But there is a very important difference between blaming someone for surviving something horrific and asking reasonable questions about witness behavior in a murder timeline. Those are not the same thing. And somewhere in this case, those 2 things started getting treated as if they were the same. In this case, the surviving roommates are not just emotionally connected to the story. They're also part of the timeline. They were in the house. They heard things. One of them, according to the probable cause affidavit, saw a figure dressed in black with a mask covering the mouth and nose area walk past her. And the 911 call did not happen until later that morning, around noon. That does not automatically mean anything sinister, but it does mean the questions are relevant. And that is where I think the public conversation around this case became very strange. Because when people ask, why wasn't 911 called sooner? Or what exactly did the surviving roommates think was happening? Or how did investigators evaluate those accounts? Those are not inherent attacks. Those are timeline questions. Those are witness questions. Those are investigative questions. And in a quadruple homicide case, I don't understand how those questions became morally off limits. None of us know exactly how we would respond in a terrifying situation. People freeze. People deny what they are seeing. People try to make abnormal fit into a normal explanation. I get that. Totally. So yes, trauma matters. Shock matters. Confusion matters. Fear matters. But compassion does not erase evidentiary relevance. If someone is inside the house during the time frame of the murders, hears things, sees something, sends texts to another roommate, tries to contact the other roommates and other people, and then there is a long delay before police are called, those details matter. Not because we are blaming them, but because they are a part of the sequence. And I understand where some of that may have come from. Kaylee's father, Steve Concalves, said very early on that people should not blame the victims. And on a human level, I understand that completely. These were young people in a horrific situation, and the surviving roommates were also victims in the sense that they survived the trauma of being in that house. But over time, that phrase, "don't blame the victims," seemed to expand. It went from "don't blame them for what happened" to almost "don't ask about their actions at all," totally off limits. And those are very different things, because asking about actions is not the same as assigning guilt. Asking why police were not called sooner is not the same as saying they are responsible for the murders. Asking how their accounts were tested is not the same as saying they lied. Asking why some of the released or publicly discussed interview material appears gentle is not the same as saying investigators should have mistreated them. It is saying, in a case this serious, with witnesses this central, how were those accounts evaluated? And when I watch some of the released interview material or hear how the surviving roommate issue has been discussed publicly, what stands out to me is how gentle the framing feels compared to how central those witnesses were to the timeline. That does not mean they were suspects. That does not mean they should have been treated badly. But it does raise a real question. Were they questioned as central witnesses whose actions and perceptions needed to be tested? Or were they treated primarily as traumatized survivors whose accounts needed to be protected? And maybe the answer is both. Maybe investigators did ask the pointed questions behind the scenes, and the public simply has not seen all of that. That is possible. But if that is the case, then that still leaves the public with a gap. Because what the public has seen is a case that ended with a guilty plea, not a trial. And also no full public testing of the evidence, no cross-examination in front of a jury, no complete airing of every timeline issue. So when people say, "Why are you still asking questions? He pleaded guilty," I understand that legally. But psychologically and narratively, that does not answer everything. A guilty plea can create legal closure. It does not automatically create narrative closure. And that is why these roommate questions have not disappeared. They keep coming back because the public timeline still has pressure points. The delay before 911 is one of them. The reported texts are one of them. The masked man sighting is one of them. The frozen shock phase description is one of them. The fact that friends were reportedly contacted before police is one of them. And every time people try to discuss those points, the conversation gets emotionally redirected into stop victim blaming. But here is my question. How does justice benefit when reasonable questions become socially forbidden? How does truth benefit when people are trained to feel morally wrong for noticing inconsistencies? And who actually benefits when the public conversation narrows before the questions are answered? I am not saying there is one hidden answer to that, not at all. But I am saying that when questions become taboo, they do not disappear. They go underground. They become suspicious. They become distrust. They become the exact thing people claim they are trying to avoid. Because if the official story is strong, it should be able to withstand careful questions. If the timeline makes sense, it should be explainable. If the surviving roommate's responses are understandable through trauma, fear, confusion, intoxication, shock, or denial, then explain that clearly. But do not tell people that asking the question is the same as blaming the victims, because that is not analysis. That starts to function like narrative control. That is why the Idaho 4 case feels unresolved to so many people. Not because everyone questioning it is a conspiracy theorist, not because everyone is trying to attack the surviving roommates, but because certain parts of the story were never fully processed in public. They were emotionally sealed off. And once something is sealed off, people notice. That is what I'll be watching for when I read Broken Plea, because I want to know whether this book addresses those pressure points directly. Because for me, the question is not, how do we blame the roommates? The question is, why did asking about the timeline become framed as blame? That is the pattern. And once you see that pattern, it changes the way you hear the whole case. Because the issue is not only what happened in that house, it is what happened afterward in the public narrative. What got emphasized, what got softened, what got protected, what got repeated, and what people were told not to ask. So no, I am not here to attack the surviving roommates. I am here to say that compassion and scrutiny can coexist. Survivor empathy and timeline analysis can coexist. And if we care about justice, they have to. So I want to know what you think. When did questioning the surviving roommates become treated as victim blaming? Do you think that response came from genuine compassion? Do you think it came from discomfort with the timeline? Or do you think it became a way to protect the official narrative from scrutiny? Let me know in the comments. With Broken Plea coming out, I'll be watching closely to see whether this issue is finally addressed, or whether it remains one of the questions people are still told not to ask. I'll be reading and reacting chapter by chapter as I go through it. So subscribe if you want to follow this with me. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.